real quick before I go any further. Are you recording this?
I am recording.
Yes.
Oh, okay. There we go. I see the. I didn't see the little recording.
You see the light.
Before. See the light. Yeah, I'm Sam Brooke. I'm with Leland Consulting Group, and we're leading this study along with Anna East and Andy Pox of Gel, Oregon as well.
Is Andy not going to join us today?
I think he was planning to, but I haven't heard anything from him.
Because he had some really substantial information at the last couple of meetings. He's our financial guy, Dirk.
Okay.
And I'm James Graham, Economic Development Manager, Oregon City, and also manager of Urban Renewal District.
And I'm Frank O'Donnell. I'm actually one of your 5 Oregon City Commission members. I'm also the chair of Urban Renewal. And it looks like the next, other than that simple explanation who I am, let me just do a brief 40,000-foot introduction. I see we've only got 6 people, and we're all either presenters or consultants or whomever, except for William, who's, I always appreciate his attendance. I'm just going to say a couple things. James and I have some conversations of our own, and I have conversations with many people, including those who have traditionally opposed urban renewal. And, you know, we have to understand the vision and the role of urban renewal is to, you know, other than the stated conditions of recovering from blight and stuff like that. I mean, the goal is to create employment and to create value and a return on the investment. And if you were to talk to some of the opponents, their argument with urban renewal has been you continue to collect money and nothing comes of it, we don't move forward. So actually, if we were to construct some projects, if it were project-based, which is the term some of the opponents have used, then we could possibly get their buy-in, and I think we would. And then the question is, what would those projects be? James Graham has an integral role in that, as does the commission as visionaries. We've got large chunks of land. We've got some small properties we own, and James knows what those properties are. I've asked for a list of them. I honestly feel we don't need to hit the $40 million home run. Maybe we need to hit a smaller success. Historically, you know, there's been some arguments about how urban renewal was used, and I'm not going to take issue with that because I agree with it. We want that return on investment that needs to be generated. So we've gone through a number of things, and if our financial guy was here, my understanding was, and I directed the effort initially with the help of my co-commissioners, that I think we're paid off. I think urban renewal paid off as of early December, and if that's correct, all options are open, including the option to shut it down. And I'm not necessarily in favor of that. I think properly used, it's a wonderful tool. So the question is, you know, how do we move forward on it and how do we use it? And the whole function of this thing was an educational process for the community. But I don't, obviously, you know, from our attendance here, and I do appreciate the OCBA putting on their thing, which was helpful.
Did you watch that?
Busy. I did. And people are so busy that it falls to leadership to lead. And I'd like to, you know, I want to start soliciting projects and put a project itself in front of the people and say, we intend to do this, and the payback on this project is this, and our financial involvement is this. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a gigantic project like the Cove or even the landfill. You know, we've got other lots in town that we could possibly use. So we're at a point in time that there's questions to be answered. I'm going to pose questions because I haven't been satisfied with some of the answers. I felt they've been inconsistent, but it's not for me to dominate this meeting either. So I think I should leave it at that point. Let me see what the agenda says, and I've got it on my phone. And it says, you know, why is this conversation important? Well, you know, we talked about a lot of things. We've previously talked about changing the boundaries of the UR district, about doing away with it altogether, about the impact on taxing districts. And I truly appreciate the effort made by the consultants on the taxing districts because their input is everything, primarily the schools and the fire district. And I know William said that, it really doesn't change the amount of taxes you pay. And that was an important thing because people might have that perception. It's just as to how they're allocated. So rather than rattle on, is the conversation important? Yes, we have a tool. Do we want to keep the tool? How do we want to use the tool? Historically, I don't like to look back forever. I know there were mistakes made. You can't live in the past. You have to live in the present and the future. So how can we use this tool from here forward? I'll turn that over to whomever would like to take the helm for a bit. And then I'm going to pose a question that's bothered me. So I see William's hand is up. Go ahead, William.
Excuse me, Commissioner, just one small tweak of your presentation, which I thought was very clear and comprehensive and correct. Save one word. You mentioned at the beginning that one of the purposes of urban renewal was jobs, and I think that's really not accurate. It's for tax increment, and you can have tax increment without jobs. Yes, of course, we all want jobs, and we all know the benefits of jobs, but you can increase the value of a piece of property without increasing jobs.
I don't disagree with that. I know Commissioner Neely felt strongly about the providing for jobs. I think jobs follow with effective development. So, but it should be the primary goal.
We would hope, yeah.
Any other input from anyone that present?
Yeah, and you mentioned, Commissioner, that all debt has been paid off. As far as we understood it, it was scheduled to be paid off based on a projection in 2023, but that we heard confirmation that as of I believe earlier this month it was paid off. So this coming fiscal year will be all, as you said, all options are on the table.
And we saved a lot of money by paying that off early.
Almost $500,000. Yes, I know the final figure came in at like 497, but I know that we did two payments. One we paid initially. I don't remember what that number was. The final, as stated by our acting finance guy, was like 497 and something. So, that was just good housekeeping. And that goes back to the argument by people that say, you're continuing to collect money, urban renewal, but you're not doing anything with it. So do something. And that's where I think we could get support if we generated a project that showed the criteria we want, which is return on investment and development of the community. I may as well pose my question because it troubles me. I have asked on multiple occasions about changing the boundaries of the existing urban renewal district, and we're on firm ground on the 1% representing only a minor change. And 1% actually is up to about 9 acres since we've got 90 in the current urban renewal district. But then I've asked on multiple occasions if I took land out of the urban renewal district, does that allow me to change the boundary even further? And the example was, for some reason, we had South End Road in there, which is a county-owned road. But if I were to take an additional 10 acres out, could I then increase the size of the existing district by the 1% already allowed, plus the 10 I've removed? And I've felt that I've gotten two different answers on 3 different occasions. And we need to be on firm ground on that, because that could be a big play as far as what we do. So if we need to clarify that at a later date, Sam, or if you're comfortable with it now, you tell me how we want to do it.
Yeah, and the simplest answer is yes, that is correct.
Yes, what is correct? That I essentially could increase it by the 1%, which is 9 acres. And if I took 10 acres out, I could add those in. I could increase it by 19 acres.
Yes.
Because the gentleman said up to 20 acres, he said.
You can shift however much land around, as long as you're not exceeding a net increase of 1%.
Well, that confounds me, because the 1% is 9 acres. So You're saying if I took 9 acres out, I could put 9 acres, but I can already put 9 acres in without taking land out. I'm not sure we're communicating back and forth well.
I
Can
think 1% is 0.9 acres.
Aren't we 90 acres or not downtown?
We're
1%
we're
would be 0.9 acres.
Oh yeah, 1%
whole-
is 0.9 acres. You're right. Sorry.
yeah, but that's actually incorrect to begin with, because the whole district is 855 acres.
Okay.
So,
That makes sense.
so that's where your 9 acres comes from, Commissioner, because 1% of 855 is 8.5 acres.
Right.
Yeah, that's where you're at. So your 9 acres is correct. You can add up to 8.55 acres as it is if you don't change the boundary. Sorry, you can add 8.55 acres to the existing area,
Right.
as bounded currently. But certainly, if you were to add that, then you wouldn't be able to add anything more unless you took it out somewhere else. So it's a one-for-one it's a one-to-one replacement plus the 1%.
Okay. So, and the gentleman before, and I forget his name, he's your expert. He said up to 20 acres total. And I don't know if that's a correct analysis or not. So basically you're saying I can do my 8.55 acres. If I took out 11 other acres somewhere else in the district and added in another 11 acres, I could add in 19.55 acres and still be within the law.
I believe what I believe the number 20 that you're remembering is actually 20%. So by law, you are allowed as a commission or as a city to go up to a 20% increase, but that's going to trigger a substantial amendment. So that's generally speaking, like if we're thinking about changing it, then you can add 20% to the existing area, but between that 1% and the 20% increase, that's going to trigger a substantial amendment. You can only go up to a 1% increase within that minor amendment.
Okay. So I'm not sure what the process is for a major amendment, but I'm going to defer to William Gifford, who has his hand up. Go ahead, William.
Commissioner, I think that there are a number of different issues here that are being spoken of in the same breath, and they really should be looked at separately. Issue number one is the distinction between a minor adjustment and a major, a significant, substantial. I think a substantial amendment is the terminology. Without a substantial amendment requires public process. It requires a redescription of the urban renewal plan and a lot of other technical things. A substantial amendment is, in a word, substantial. Without going all that far, there are other options. One option is to increase the current boundary by 1%, up to 1%. That's just, and that stands on its own. You can increase it more than that, but it would be a substantial amendment. Now, separate from the 1%, and just put that on the side table someplace, you also have the ability of moving the boundaries. That is, you can just shift 5 acres here and put 5 acres over there. You can shift the boundaries around, and if you keep going back to the 10 acres, and that's an arbitrary number, make it 9 acres, make it whatever acres you want. If you take something out, you can put the same amount back in. But that's totally separate from the 1%. And that's totally separate, and that you can also only do not as a substantial amendment. It's just not considered a substantial amendment to realign the boundaries. There's another concept, and that is, by law, there's a maximum amount of the city's boundaries which can be in an urban renewal district. You can't make the whole city an urban renewal district. There's a limit based on the area of the city, and I think it's 20%. You can't have more than 20% of the total area of the city described as an urban renewal district. Now,
25%.
25%. Thank you, James. within that, you can pretty much do whatever you want. If you already have a district defined, you can make changes to it. You can move the boundaries as long as you don't increase the boundaries by more than 1%, your goal. If you wanted to increase the boundaries by more than 1%, regardless of whether you move, 10 acres here and take them out there, you can do that up to 25% of the entire city. So there's about 4 or 5 different concepts there. And I'm sorry that previous conversations, I have heard you conflate those issues, and I think they really need to be understood as being separate concepts. Does that help at all?
Well, basically the 1% is the limiting factor that keeps it minor. And whether you say I'm taking land out or putting it in, or I'm moving boundaries, you're still controlled by that 1%, right? I can't
Yes.
sense the number. End of story.
Absolutely correct. The question that I have not heard asked is, how often can you increase by 1%?
That was my next question. I think it's once, but I'll let Sam answer.
Can you do that again next year? Thank you.
I mean, to my knowledge, there is no limiting factor. You can do it every year. But I will absolutely confirm that.
Yeah, we need to confirm that.
Yeah, I guess, a minor amendment is still it does still take some administrative process. It's not, it's significantly easier than a substantial amendment relative to those two things. But
you have to make amendments to the plan if you increase the area by 1%.
Well, you have to create a new description, and if there are projects in the plan currently that fit within the reasoning for increasing that boundary, then arguably you wouldn't necessarily need to make any other updates. But under a minor amendment, you can also change the project list or reduce the maximum indebtedness. There are other things you can do within that minor amendment. So you probably wouldn't want to.
I would stand with Commissioner O'Donnell and say, I hope that we don't increase or change the boundaries without corresponding changes to the projects.
Yes.
Don't increase it by 1% just because you can.
No.
Have a reason for doing it.
Yes.
Oh, an administrative question. I see Craig's name on here.
Yeah, I was just going to mention we do have 2 folks that have just joined us. We have Lynn Wallace and Craig, and I just wanted to give them the opportunity to speak up.
Oh,
hello.
That's Craig.
Just a little recap for us. We're kind of having a free-flowing conversation, but we are here to answer questions about urban renewal, obviously. So please, Lynn and Craig, feel free to speak up or chime in if you so wish.
Good morning, Lynn.
You're on mute, Lynn.
Hello. Yes, just here to learn a little bit more. We bring this often. We bring this up often in the GEAC meetings, so I'm glad to attend. Thank you.
Well, chime in anytime or raise your hand. I can see the participants. So there's a thing that says raise hand, and we can see that also. Or you can send in any question via the chat room if you like.
Frank, do you know Lynn?
I'm sure we've met. I don't know her very well. I certainly know Craig, if it's who I think it is, the anonymous Craig.
Yeah, that's Danielson. Yeah.
Yeah, I know him. So I mean, a lot of what we're doing today is getting clarification and review of previous meetings. I mean, the objections to urban renewal in the past have been by specific taxing districts. The question came up about the fire district and do we affect their revenue? And we could probably answer that question again if we wanted. And then the question about the school funding is always one that it's like, I understand that urban renewal takes money out of the pool of money that the state uses to fund the schools. However, we're always told that the state then makes up that money from other revenue sources on a per student basis. And the argument from people who oppose urban renewal is simply that, well, indirectly you affect it because you've reduced the pool of money that's available for students. Counter argument, of course, is the state makes up that money from other revenue sources and pays back to the district on a per student basis, if that's correct.
Yes, and there's a couple of nuances there as well. If you can speak to. One is the fact that in undertaking urban renewal, the projects that are implemented should, in theory, create more jobs or more revenue in other ways that helps to more than helps to break up any shortfall in property tax revenue. So there's that piece as well to mention as well, not just from a property tax perspective, but income taxes and other revenue.
Well, more than even that, Sam, because income taxes don't affect the school funding. What affects school funding is population of the schools. And if by using urban renewal, we can increase housing opportunities or jobs that would incite people to move to Oregon City, by increasing the number of students, the school would get more money.
The interesting thing about urban renewal, and of course on the eastern side of the Mississippi, most people call it redevelopment. But a lot of communities across the country that have urban renewal or redevelopment start with a vision for the area. And I guess I will always argue for a vision for the area, because you can focus on projects and end up with a conglomeration of projects that actually it doesn't really do very much for economic growth. And that's the danger, because some communities use urban renewal to invest in, they take the position that we will use urban renewal resources to attract private enterprise and private growth that create jobs that pay a livable wage. And then other communities use urban renewal or redevelopment to invest in amenities, public amenities like roads and trees and park benches and those kind of things, in the hope of using those kind of amenities to attract other kinds of investment. And then the third area that some people use urban renewal monies for is a combination of both of those things, attracting private investment and investing in amenities. So it's always important to start, a budget is a budget, and it's basically numbers. But without a vision, you're basically going to burn through money in ways that you probably did not intend to.
Brilliant.
James, your point is well taken. I mean, if it's a fragmented approach, what do we end up with as a final product? Or if we have a cohesive goal, and in the furtherance of that goal, these are the elements that we'd like to add in and do that, that would be my preference. And I honestly, as chair of urban renewal or as a city commission, I would entertain, and does it fall to us to say, here's what we want to do, or how do we structure something that we don't end up with a series of fragmented projects that really don't accomplish what we want in the end?
Well, it does start with you and the public, but primarily in my experience, a lot of times it also starts with staff, where staff recommends a vision and concepts and goals, and then there's a discussion ensued by the commissioners or the city council, and then RFPs are put out based on an accepted vision for the project, and then developers respond, and you get the opportunity to choose those RFPs based on your vision, based on how they fulfill the vision of the commission and the community.
So in your position as point man, economic development, I honestly don't feel that you've been given a clear statement by the commission or the urban, here's what we want to do. How do we go about accomplishing it? Do you feel that needs to be forthcoming? It's like, what do you need for direction?
Well, that definitely needs to be forthcoming, but for two reasons. It needs to be forthcoming so that I, as manager of the area, can proceed with marching orders. But the other thing is, what also needs to, the other reason why it's important to have a vision is so that you can have supporters of urban renewal, because I think that's where you started off on the wrong foot. Not having a vision for urban renewal, started looking at projects and dealing with developers who promised you one thing and did something else. And so that can happen. And it all starts with having a very strong vision and also a focused staff and supporters of that vision. And then it goes from there. And I didn't want to get too much into the weeds, but it really starts from there. And a lot of communities are successful when they have a shared vision for the urban renewal area or the redevelopment area.
And I confess to, even at this late date, learning as I go. I mean, I know we had this listing of properties, some of which are owned by urban renewal. I mean, if we had a vision as to what we wanted to accomplish, and we could put out that RFP, say these properties could potentially become available with urban renewal support in the furtherance of this goal. And so that's a good conversation to have. I'm going to switch gears for a moment, not seeing any hands up.
I think William had a hand up.
Yeah, excuse me. I'd like
Okay,
just
I see.
just a little bit of spin on James's explanation there is, I'm not certain that I agree that it begins with staff. I think vision begins with policymakers. Vision begins with those elected officials who are, frankly, ostensibly more in touch with their community. The staff, more often than not, lives within their own boundaries. They stay in their lanes, and I'm not saying that they're in an ivory tower, but they don't have the opportunity to, as often, to directly communicate with the community. Insofar as having a vision, I think broadly speaking, you could the commission could say, this is an area we'd like to see retail in. This is where we'd like to see some housing. This is where we need a parking structure generally, and then let staff figure out how to make that happen. But I know that many times the impetus for such things as, take for example, Benchmade Knives, one of our largest manufacturers, if not the largest manufacturer in the city, would not have come here had it not been for the mayor talking to the owner and inviting them to come to the city and look around. And it wasn't staff that brought Benchmade Knives to Oregon City. They may have facilitated it after the vision was more concrete, but it was the vision of the electeds that brought those to fruition.
I certainly understand the distinction William is making, and I agree with it totally. I mean, staff executes the vision once it's made clear to them what it is we want to accomplish. And in that vein, I know that, the city has specific properties. We need to start talking about, should we be exploring, putting those out, soliciting. I know my argument with the previous occupant of James's position was sitting there waiting for the phone to ring. I want to come up with a plan, and I want to get out there and I want to promote it, and I want to attract people knowing that we'll be supportive of that plan. I'm going to switch gears now in the absence of another hand. At one point, Sam and others talked about the potential to reestablish the baseline and free up those TIF generated increases that go back to the taxing districts. Does that need to be done in total? Like, if you've generated $20 million in TIF increases, can you free up part of that? We're talking about reestablishing a baseline for growth in an urban renewal district. Can you give me any details on that?
Where's Andy? Where's Andy?
Well, and that may be a very complex question that we do need an answer from Andy. I mean, I know the argument specifically from the fire district. They're probably one of the most adamant opponents because they have to float bonds to make up for operating revenues. Can we free up a percentage of TIF generated increases, or is it an all or nothing proposal? And that's probably an Andy question.
Yeah, I think it's really up to the city's discretion. I think the one piece I'll add is whatever you do, you'd probably want to do for all taxing districts. You wouldn't want to. I know the fire district, for example, is arguably the most impacted, and the reasoning for releasing increment back to the fire district is perhaps the strongest argument for any of the taxing districts. But if you were to do that for one, then you probably need to do that for all.
And that wasn't my proposal, Sam. My proposal was, can I free up to all taxing districts some percentage of the incremental value that I've generated? Or does it have to be, no, you can't do it. You got to either start over at zero or you can do this. And
There are two questions there. Are there two questions, Frank? Excuse me. One says, can we just, what is basically called thaw and refreeze? Basically close it, take the increment out, and then you create another urban renewal district and start all over again. And I think that there's been some arguments against that because the length of time it would take to pay off that additional debt. But the second question that I think I hear you asking is, can you take part of that increment and distribute it back to either all of the districts or a particular set of districts?
Yeah, you've actually just broke down my compound question into two separate questions, and you were right.
Yeah. I'm pretty intimately involved with the fire district. I just spent almost an 8-hour meeting yesterday interviewing for the new fire chief. And since I sit on that budget committee, every year the issue of urban renewal comes up, and they are concerned about how much money they are not getting. But in the last town hall meeting that we had with Mayor Neely, I think Sam was the one that brought up, who was it that brought up something that I wasn't really familiar with, is that you can take that increment and purchase make capital purchases for a particular district, such as can be bought a new fire engine for their district, for their fire district, out of urban renewal funds. I wasn't aware that you could do that.
Well, that's where City Hall came from.
And you know the objections to the City Hall project. That is probably the poster child for those that object to the way urban renewal was used. But
because it does not generate any tax increment, and neither would purchasing a fire truck for the fire district. You're right.
Yeah.
But that would come right down to the vision issue once again as to what you want to do with the money that you generate through urban renewal. William, let me ask you a question. I have a question of you because you're on the fire district. Because I would think that if with new development occurring within a redevelopment area, urban renewal area, those new facilities, for instance, would probably be designed in such a way to help reduce the occurrence of fires and damage by fires.
Let me change hats. And
that's a new hat over there.
I thought you were going Santa Claus on us.
No, that's the logo for the CFD one.
I saw it.
So summarize that question again, please, James.
Okay. In other words, say that there were new developments that occurred in the redevelopment area, and those new developments had sprinkler systems and all kinds of things, fire retardant kinds of. Wouldn't that reduce the need?
Yes, it would. As a matter of fact, I have made that. The OCBA had a meeting. 3 of us went and talked to the chief about this extensively, and made that very specific point that new buildings are built under new building codes and are safer and reduces the demand for their services. However, and that's a big however, you have to realize that, and the numbers are climbing actually. It used to be 75% pretty straight on, and now it's up over 80 to 85% of all fire district responses are not for fires, but for medical emergencies, for heart attacks, hitting up a tree, whatever the issue is, they are not fire related, because generally across the board, buildings are getting safer. Response times are faster.
Yeah.
Greg, talk to me.
The other issue is, and this is the issue I have, they build a 3-story building, it might have new fire codes, but then the fire district has to buy a ladder truck. So there's costs that the fire district has depending on what the expansion is. And as you know, and I'll be quiet, and I think Frank understands this, when the city spends 50,000 here and 150 there, and there's no increase in assessed value, it doesn't pay for itself. If there was a big project and they took a bare piece of land like Wilsonville and built something on it and pays it back in 10 or 15 years, that's great. I don't know, James, if you have the fire department's position on urban renewal, but it's a very, short 3-page statement. And you should look at it, because they're for urban renewal if it doesn't go on for 15, 20 years.
And the poster child for that was Clackamas Town Center, which was a gross misuse of urban renewal. The fact that you have a 30-year urban renewal district, absurd.
Correct, but elected officials really like spending that money on the roads and stuff out there.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Use it and then shut it off.
Well, that's another argument by the opponents. Like, it's got to have an end date. Either you accomplished the task within that, or you did not. And a never-ending story is not looked upon with favor by those who oppose. And I agree with them. You set a task, you set a target date to completion, you monitor a project during the course of its life, and you either accomplish it or you don't. And at the conclusion, you end it, and then you decide what are you doing next, if anything. I was listening. I understand what Craig's saying. I understand the fire department's position. I understand the need for equipment. The struggle, the doggone thin line is, do you make if you don't generate incremental growth, tax growth, property value growth, I think about, what does downtown need? God, downtown needs a place to park. Can I do that no, not really. It's not really is a parking structure a good project? No, it doesn't qualify under the terms. Does a fire engine that makes the community more attractive for growth, does it qualify? No. So it's all about, to me, I'm with Craig as far as pick a spot, pick a piece of dirt, start with bare land, which gives you the greatest incremental growth in the fastest time period, and launch a project and demonstrate a success. And I don't care if it's, we've got project land downtown, 10th and Main, 12th and Main. Do we have, the other thing that came up in previous meetings is, I like the idea that if I've got this 8.55 acres, it doesn't have to be contiguous. As long as it's connected by a thoroughfare or a right of way or a public street, I could put a tentacle out to the end of the city limits and do something if I wanted. And that was an interesting concept to me. And I hope I interpreted it correctly. This has actually turned into a round table among citizens who will be involved, and I'm actually enjoying it much more than I thought. So open for input by anybody.
Hey, I actually wanted to go back because I realized I didn't, I think we moved on to a different question, Frank, before anything was really answered. But just to go back to the release of increment to the taxing districts, or a portion of that. Interestingly, so 2 years after the substantial amendment for this plan occurred in 2007, 2 years afterwards, in 2009, the Oregon legislature passed a bill requiring new districts to commit to revenue sharing. So at a certain point, at a certain threshold in a plan's life, a certain proportion of the new increment would start to be released to taxing districts. So that's basically to get at your point, and that is a portion of it. So there's nothing the city doing, stopping the city from doing that at this point. It would just take an agreement, an amendment to the plan that could be included in a minor amendment. and you would probably just any amendment made wouldn't require the city to adhere but to the new regulations, but there's nothing stopping the city from doing that anyway.
What percentage are they allowed to give back?
It is I know that I'm not certain there's a limit on what the city can give back. I think that in terms of the revenue sharing equation, it is there's a minimum amount that has to be given back, but I don't have that off the top of my head.
We need to find that out, because I mean, there's the option of, gee, can we give it all back? Not that we would want to, but we ought to know where in the spectrum, what are our options?
I agree with
We
you.
should make a decision without knowing the options.
I agree, William. I'd like to get that nailed down in writing. Says city, urban renewal, city of Oregon City, here's your options. You can free up X percentage. How much do you want to free up to all taxing districts? No, we can't identify just one. I think that's something to be explored.
Or there's another, now correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but there's another way to do this. It's more than one way to do that if you want to release tax increment to various districts. One way is payment in lieu of taxes.
Yes.
And it's less cumbersome. It's very, you don't have to go through a lot of too many gyrations. Whoever is investing in an area can decide, well, we'll agree to pay this amount of tax to the districts through an agreement between ourselves and the district. We'll pay the school district this, or should the fire district that. They could agree to that. And every investment could be done that way instead of committing yourself to something like an umbrella agreement.
Well, let me understand that, James. If I come in as a developer, I'm going to develop land, and I would normally have to pay $20,000 in taxes. I can make an agreement at the time of a purchase of that property from Urban Renewal that says, in lieu of those taxes, every year I'm going to pay, in lieu of those, I'm going to pay this amount to some taxing district.
Yes.
Well,
Interesting.
then what's the incentive for the developer? I mean, the incentive for the developer now is that deferment of incremental taxes.
Well, to answer your question, William, the incentive to the developer is he or she would be paying less taxes through that payment agreement. In other words, Commissioner O'Donnell had mentioned $20,000 as an example. So the developer could pay, say, $15,000 or $10,000, and that way, it's still an incentive for that person, but also other entities who have an interest in the area would also receive tax increment too. So it's a kind of a win-win situation. You get the developer pays less, but on the other hand, those interested in getting their money sooner than waiting on the redevelopment area to either close down could also get something along the way.
Are you saying the money would go directly to the taxing entity?
Yes.
To the overlaying districts?
Yes.
Or to a pool to be distributed among all of them.
There's no one. You can do it several ways. It's open to you. But I think that we have to take a look at these strategies and not get too crazy. Sort of like take a sort of like a good measured approach to a strategy, and it's part of the vision. That's all part of the vision.
That's a long conversation, but it's an interesting one to consider.
Yeah, we touched upon that payment in lieu of taxes before, because as you know, I was thinking about the Willamette Falls Legacy Project and the publicly owned lands and the lands owned by the tribes and the dangers of investing in the tribal owned lands if they chose to assert their national sovereignty. They wouldn't be a taxable entity. Then they would the agreement would have to be payment in lieu of taxes, or for the easement, who owns it? Should we be investing in it? How do we protect our investment? That's a whole other conversation, but I just want to share with you the things that run through my mind on occasion.
All are valid. All of those are valid.
Yeah. Well, it takes truly it takes vision. I mean, a good, I think a work session is in order. And I honestly, of all the sessions I've attended, I'm enjoying this one because these are people in the community that make things happen and delve into the details. So thanks to everybody. We've got almost 10 minutes left. Anybody want to kick off a different subject or comment on those that we already talked about?
Thanks for giving us our time check, Frank.
Yeah. Is there anybody, either the consultants or attendees, that want to launch or elaborate upon a previously spoken about topic?
Well, here's a new topic, and it was a topic that was raised by Craig Danielson probably, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago. It seems must have been closer to 8 years ago. We had a presentation on urban renewal, and it was at the time when they had, I think, just purchased the new city hall, and the issue was that in addition to that, the purchase of that land and the rehab of the building, there were furnishings that were purchased, and those were purchased with urban renewal monies.
Mm-hmm.
And it was more of a philosophical question as to whether or not that was legitimate use of urban renewal money. And I think the argument that was used by the then city manager is the building itself is useless without furniture. Yeah. And if you contend that, yeah, you can use urban renewal money to build a building, and I still disagree, and I disagreed with the mayor at the time that was not a good use of urban renewal money, and she said, oh, it's only temporary. Yeah, well, it's been a long time, but I think it's not an unreasonable argument that a building is not usable if it doesn't have what it needs to be saying, well, yeah, you can use urban renewal money, but not to put water in there. You can't pipe any water in there because the building would be useless without it. It's an interesting distinction.
Well, I'm not going to enter into the discussion on the City Hall because it predates me, and I get in enough trouble in commenting on things that predate me. But your distinction about buying furniture and supplying utilities and all, it's like, I think people need to see the direct benefit. The further you get from the direct benefit, the harder it is to make the point.
You're right. James had used the word amenities a number of times, and I'm going to suggest in lieu of that word that we use the word infrastructure. And we can use infrastructure for roads and sewers and pipes and lighting and trees and all of those things, because to me, that's what infrastructure is. And amenities seems to be sort of an optional frill. And I'm not in agreement that those infrastructure elements are really a frill. I think that they're a necessity.
You're not going to get a debate on me with words. I'll go with any word you meant. I think we all know
Well, I'll say that whole conversation is interesting because for those that attended the PRAC meeting and talking about the value of parks and attracting businesses and the livability of your community, is there an indirect benefit to potential future employers that when your park system is thriving? So we had that discussion within the PRAC committee.
When was that, Frank?
Oh, I think it was just last week. These meetings all run together, but it was like, is there value to a potential future employer when he comes to your city and see that's incredibly livable?
I'm sorry, I didn't know about that because I asked Scott Archer, who was our former parks director, that very question. And it took until after he left the city to finally get back to me. I pegged him at some banquet we were both attending. And he followed up and gave me a list of links pointing out the economic value of parks and how it positively affects property values. And I'll try to find that email and share it with you, Frank. It's really insightful as to how valuable parks are insofar as increasing property values.
Well, that meeting is recorded, and the presenter did an excellent job, and she made that point, and we should make sure that you get a hold of that piece of it because it was good. We're approaching the end of the meeting. I truly have enjoyed this roundtable with people with valid input. Thank you to everybody. we're within a few minutes of the end of the session. Do our presenters or consultants wish to do any concluding statements, or anyone else?
Nope. I guess what we could say is I think this is the last of our town halls, correct? Yes.
It is.
We've done a number of them. So thank you, Commissioner Frank O'Donnell, for rounding out the series of town hall events. One thing to note is that we have a survey that is live on the Oregon City Urban Renewal Study webpage, and it is essentially an extension of the discussions we're having here and the presentation material that's been put forth in front of a variety of different community organizations and also the general public. So that online survey is just an additional avenue to collect input, feedback, questions, etc. As you have them. I think it will be live for the next couple of weeks still. We're not closing it down. But all of the presentation material, all of the recordings from each of these town hall events, etc., they're all available on the website. So this, all that information is made available. Next, James, please.
Also, want to keep in mind that in January, we will most likely have a community engagement, a community workshop, engaging the public on the same subject matter of urban renewal. And then I've been in conversation with Kent Ziegler of Oregon City Business Alliance, and we very well may have a conversation or meeting with that group in March. So those are the upcoming discussions on this subject matter.
I think we're hoping they have the entire March forum dedicated to urban renewal.
I'd like to say something in closing. We've talked about so many concepts, and some of which we've just recently explored, like the possibility of freeing up some percentage of the value we've generated. Do the consultant group, can they summarize that in a written report about key concepts visited, and maybe use that as a part of the guidance for the largest meeting yet to occur? And for future guidance, what I don't like about meetings is things are bannered about and then nothing happens. And I need to take the seed and say, look at this point. Let's bring that to closure. And I think a summary of key points that were discussed throughout these exchanges we've had would serve us well in written form to guide us for future discussions. And that's just me speaking as an individual. I don't like a meeting that doesn't result in any next action.
Certainly. And I'll just say, Frank, the way that we were, our scope was written was to reflect exactly that. Take everything that we've heard during these town halls and the community meeting conducted thus far, and really highlight some of those key messaging, those key points, and frame some messaging around it. I will say, just behind the scenes, we are doing some analysis on different options already, just to give some data-driven information that isn't just based on sort of conversations, but actually provide some more concrete information to the commission and the city, so we can get some ideas of projections, what that might look like financially, et cetera, et cetera. So pretty high level at the moment, but we hear you.
Well, I look forward to that as a starting point for more in-depth discussions. I see we've reached the appointed hour. Any final comments or inputs by anyone attending?
Happy solstice.
To all. Thank you, William, again for valuable input. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you very much for hosting us. Everybody have a great day.
Right. So long.
Bye.